afternoon and welcome to the Global Recruitment Agency's presentation for Davidson Network Group. Today myself, Maria, Paula, Thao, Renee and Zoe will be presenting for you. We're going to look at a few things. So the contents for today's presentation will include data cleaning. It's also going to include the aim of our project, which we've broken down into three sections: our market decision proposal, our market research problem and our market research objectives. We're also going to have a look at the overall demographics of the data, as well as the methodologies that we'll be using, and we'll conclude with our limitations and the deficiencies of our data set.
So in order for our results to be valid and accurate, we needed to first clean our data. And the first way to do that was for question 14. So any of the respondents that did not respond with strongly disagree, their results were removed from our data set, as it indicated that they had a lack of concentration and their results probably didn't have much meaning. And cleaned and recoded the data in terms of the country of origin. So all of the Asian countries were recoded as one, so that includes East Asia, South Asia and Central Asia, and then all the non-Asian countries were recoded as 0, so that includes the Middle East, Oceania, Africa, North America and South America. Finally, variables where the count was 0 were recoded as systems missing to eliminate inappropriate data. The next thing that we did to clean our data, we changed some of our data measures. So question 15, where satisfaction was originally nominal, we changed that to scale. Question 17, where age was initially nominal, we changed that to ordinal. Question 22, where the number of family members was labelled as nominal, we changed that to ordinal. And finally, question 23, education was labelled as nominal when it was supposed to be ordinal. So the aim of our project is that the company is basically looking to expand into Asian and non-Asian countries. We want to determine which attributes are considered important in each country in order to select employees that are best fit in these different workplaces. The first thing that we need to do is to find out what service representatives are best fit for Asian and non-Asian countries and which attributes are highly valued in these two areas. The second thing we need to do is understand how the race of the service representatives and the race of the customers influence the overall customer satisfaction. So we've first started by describing our market decision problem. Our market decision problem was to determine what service representatives are most suitable for Asian and non-Asian countries. We then moved to our market research problem. So the market research problem was to determine what attributes of service representatives are regarded as important by Asian and non-Asian consumers. And the final thing that we're going to look at are our different market research objectives, which we have 3 of. The first is to determine what service representatives are of best fit for Asian and non-Asian countries based on different attributes. The second market research objective is to determine if the race of customers and service representatives influences the customer's overall satisfaction, and these were split into 4 categories. And finally, the last market research objective was to determine if the characteristics of the service representatives influence customers' overall satisfaction for Asians and non-Asians.
We're going to have a look at some of the demographics of our data set, and the demographics are going to allow us to know who our consumers are, who our respondents are, who our service representatives are. It's going to help us conduct our whole project. So we're going to look at age, education, gender, employment, number of people in family, country of origin and relationship status. So first of all, we can see from our pie chart over here that in the green section is predominantly female respondents of our survey. And if we have a look over here at our age category, it's predominantly 18 to 25 years of age. We're also going to have a look at our employment status. So if we see over here in the purple section, the majority of our respondents are full-time students and a majority of them are single. Having a look at the number of people in the family, most respondents are in the purple zone, which is a number of 4, followed by the yellow zone, which is a household of 5 members. We then have a look at our education qualifications. Most of our respondents are from a year 12 or equivalent, with some of them being from a bachelor, which may or may not have included honours. Country of origin is quite important. So as you can see from our pie chart, there are various countries of origin. The green section represents Oceania, which predominantly all our respondents are from, followed by the purple and the cream zone, which you're looking at East Asia and Southeast Asia. We then wanted to categorise our country of origin into Asian and non-Asian. So we had a look at Asian as equaling 1, which is the green section, and non-Asian as 0, which is the blue section. If we have a look at our frequency table over here, we can see that we had 683 respondents that labelled themselves as Asian, and 1,140 respondents that labelled themselves as non-Asian. This data is crucial for the rest of our project, as we will be categorising our data into Asian and non-Asian.
Our first market objective is to determine whether service representatives are best fit for Asian and non-Asian countries. So we looked at the attributes that were provided. So the first one is planning and hard work. The second one is rules and regulations. The third one is groups are more important than individuals. And we also look at hierarchies are important in corporations. We had a look at the men work differently as compared to women. However, we will speak more about it in our final report. So for this, we ran the independent t-test because we had to compare two different groups, which were Asians and non-Asians. And we had 4 examinable attributes. So the first one, we looked at planning and hard work. Our null hypothesis was that the importance of planning and hard work in achieving success do not differ between Asian and non-Asian customers. The alternate was that planning and hard work for achieving success do differ between Asian and non-Asian customers. Here is our output for the test. The significant value is P equals 0.01. This is less than 0.05. So therefore equal variances were not assumed. Then we looked at P equals 0.35. So we failed to reject the null hypothesis. We then looked at rules and regulations between Asians and non-Asian customers. Our null hypothesis was the importance of rules and regulations do not differ between Asians and non-Asian customers. And then we looked at the alternate hypothesis for that was that the importance of rules and regulations differs between Asians and non-Asian customers. This is our output. So our Levine's test, P equals 0.129. So the P is greater than 0.05, therefore equal variances were assumed. The P was 0.013, therefore we reject the null hypothesis. We then looked at the importance of group needs over individuals. Our null hypothesis was the importance of group needs over individuals do not differ between Asians and non-Asians. And the alternate was the importance of group needs over individuals do differ between Asians and non-Asian customers. This is our output. So P equals 0.103. The P value is greater than 0.05, therefore equal variances assumed. P was 0.01. We reject the null hypothesis. And the last thing we looked at for this marketing objective was the importance of hierarchies between Asians and non-Asian customers. Our null hypothesis was the importance of hierarchies do not differ between Asians and non-Asian customers, and our alternate hypothesis was the importance of hierarchies do differ between Asians and non-Asian customers. So this is our Levine's output. The p-value equals 0.000. The p-value is less than 0.05, therefore equal variances were not assumed. And p equals 0.00. We therefore reject the null hypothesis.
Our group's second research objective was to determine if the race of customers and the race of service representatives affected the customer's overall satisfaction. Our group determined that there were 4 different categories under this research objective. First of all, whether the service representatives were Asian and the customers were Asian. Second, if the service representatives were Asian and the customers were non-Asian. Third, if the service representatives were non-Asian and the customers were Asian. And lastly, when both the service representatives and the customers were non-Asian. Now, what test did our group decide to use? We decided to use a one-way ANOVA. This is because, as we had seen before, there were more than 2 groups. Another reason is also because there was only one question, which was the overall satisfaction of the customers. What were our null and alternate hypotheses? Our null hypothesis was that all the means of the different categories were equal. On the other hand, our alternate hypothesis was that at least one of the means was going to be different. Our group managed to run a preliminary test, and we found out that the ANOVA was significant. This implies 2 things. First of all, when the ANOVA was significant, we realized that we were able to reject the null, which meant that we accepted the alternate. And that meant that at least one of the means was going to be different. Secondly, it meant that we could use the post hoc test, which was Haynes. We had run the test, and we found out that when the service representative was Asian and the customer was non-Asian, there was a difference in the mean between when the service representative was Asian and the customer was Asian. All that this meant was that when the service representative was Asian, there was a difference in the means, whether the customers were Asian or non-Asian.
So I covered the third market research objective, which was to determine if the characteristics of the service representative influence the customer's overall satisfactions for Asians and non-Asians. Yeah. So this is important because it gives the company an insight to how they should invest their money for training their service representatives. The characteristics that we chose to focus on can be seen here, and these included the customer ratings for service representatives on their perceived rudeness, the degree of personalization of the service that they provided, the level of a personal touch that the service representative reflected, their perceived happiness, their perceived attentiveness, the degree of sincerity that they showed, as well as their perceived arrogance. So we decided to conduct a multiple linear regression because this allowed us to predict the outcome of investing certain amounts of money onto certain attributes. Our independent variable were the questions that I focused on before, which was questions 6 to 12, and our dependent variable was question 15, which was the overall satisfaction with the service that the customer chose. So for our multiple linear regression, we created a null hypothesis and an alternate hypothesis. Our null hypothesis suggested that the independent variables and the dependent variables were not related. This meant that the characteristics didn't influence the overall satisfaction ratings given by customers. Our alternate hypothesis suggested that one or more independent variables were related to the dependent variables. This meant that certain characteristics, if not all of them, influenced the dependent variable, which was overall satisfaction. Alright, okay. So when we conducted the linear regression test for non-Asians, we found that the adjusted R-squared model had to stop at number 2 because it stopped increasing by an increment of 3%. Using this, we went down to the coefficients table and used the second row to create our equation. And our equation ended up being overall satisfaction equals 2.659, which was the constant, plus 0.330 times the units for happiness, minus 0.165 times the unit for arrogance. When we conducted the linear regression test for Asians, we had to stop at the second model again because it stopped increasing by a 3% increment, and we went to the second row once again. In this case, our equation was overall satisfaction equals 3.268, which was the constant, minus 0.269 times the unit for arrogance, plus 0.272 times the unit for happiness.
Next, our group also identified the limitations and deficiencies of the data that was provided to us. We identified that there were 2 deficiencies. Firstly, that there was a non-response bias, and secondly, it was a convenient sampling. What do these 2 data mean? First of all, the non-response bias. It meant that surveys were distributed to family and friends. However, some of these individuals chosen for the sample were actually unwilling or unable to fully participate in the survey, which then skewed our data. And next, we had convenience sampling. This basically just meant that individuals who were the easiest to attain for the survey were picked. They were only chosen and asked to do the surveys because they were accessible to those who had the surveys. This also affected the data that was provided to us.
Yep. To conclude, our final slide lists our group members' names and student IDs in order of appearance within our presentation. The data that was shown in our presentation is all preliminary. We do endeavour to conduct more tests and analysis in terms of association and relationship in aim to find which service representatives are of best fit for both Asian and non-Asian regions for our client Davidson Network Group. Thank you.